So, as it says, today we're going to be looking at some of my research into the online market for steroids. So my PhD was looking at local market context of the supply of steroids, the normalization of use of steroids, and we're going to get into a bit of that when I give you the background and sort of set up this presentation. But what I'm presenting today is my research that explores one of the more popular online fitness forums, bodybuilding forums, where the supply of steroids and other image and performance enhancing drugs occurs, and we're going to examine some of the motivations for accessing steroids by these means, as well as some of the market mechanisms and how the market sort of self-regulates. So hopefully you'll find it fairly interesting. So, just an introduction. As I said, it's looking at my research into this online market. I've got a book in the works. Hopefully will be out sort of start of next year. So if you find this presentation, if you enjoy it, then be on the lookout for that, obviously. But where it's relevant to you is it gives you a practical example of a case where there are these sort of cross-borders, global, transnational issues to do with policy. So definitely, hopefully, some of you will be seeing some of the themes that should be relevant to your work. And as a specific case study of one particular bodybuilding forum, it's been a real in-depth cultural analysis, and you'll see coming through in the research findings how the culture of the forum really dictates how the marketplace operates. So from a sort of criminology, sociology perspective, also very important work. So hopefully you'll see all these themes coming through in my presentation. So what we're going to explore today, in turn, we're going to start off just with a bit of background on the phenomenon of online drug markets and their development over time, sort of where these seem to originate from, where they reached mainstream attention in the media, and the current state of them, essentially. Although, as with all academic research, this is now a few years out of date, and I will cite some recent articles on what may have changed recently. Then we're going to look at the different markets that supply image and performance enhancing drugs online. So this includes what are termed online pharmacies, these direct order websites, as well as what I'm going to be discussing, forums. And then we're going to look at the sort of cultural and economic aspects to the regulation of the market on this online bodybuilding forum, and how the culture really dictates how the market operates, and you'll see some interesting things start to emerge when we analyse the marketplace. And finally, we'll address some of the policy implications which might be relevant to these findings. So let's begin. So think about online drug markets, looking at the background of those. If we think about drugs policy which seeks to address illicit drugs, what's the key thing? The main stated intent is to minimize the harms associated with the use of drugs. And a key aspect to understanding harms and patterns of use, how people are using drugs, is to understand how the markets in drugs operates. And Ross Coomer's work is actually really interesting, where he goes through a lot of the quote-unquote common sense understandings of drug markets and really unpacks them and shows that actually these things are essentially myths. The idea of drug pushers is basically a myth. The idea of drugs being laced with more powerful drugs is essentially a myth. There are all these things that people tend to believe about drugs, but when you actually analyse the markets, when you talk to the people who supply drugs, when you really begin to explore in depth how these markets operate, you very quickly realise that actually the common sense is in fact false. So Ross Coomer's work, in addition to sort of dispelling some of those myths about drugs, also showed that actually drug markets are far more diverse than people realise. A lot of people think they're these very rigid, structured hierarchies where you have a few Mr. Bigs at the top who control everything through the use of violence. And actually, Coomer and others have written on this. You can see outside Carenzamore and Fleetwood as well, have explored these different markets and shown actually there's a really diverse range of drug markets, and some of them might be violent and tightly structured, and some actually you have these completely different mechanisms of operation. So that's what we're kind of going to explore today. So as I've noted, effective policy has to consider not only the use of drugs in discussing sort of harm minimization and so on, but actually how markets in drugs operate. Because that's the only way that we're going to avoid sort of the myths which might lead to bad policy implementation, which could potentially lead to further harms. And of course, one of the key developments, one of the largest developments in drug markets in recent years, has been the capacity that the internet has brought to these markets. So now, people can access drugs sold by people on the other side of the globe, right, just through use of their phones. So the capacity for people to access drugs has massively expanded thanks to the growth of the internet. So hence the importance of understanding online markets, the online market for steroids being one of those. So documenting how online markets in drugs have actually emerged and changed over the years, Mike Power wrote a book called Drugs 2.0, and he documents how actually you started with this very small, hardcore group of people called psychonauts, people who experimented with all these different drugs, trying to get different psychedelic experiences, different trips, and they would hang out on places such as the Steroids forums in the 1990s, just forums where you could discuss drugs and make connections with other people who had the same interest. But by about 2008, 2009, we see this real mainstream awareness. So I've got these articles from the Telegraph to sort of illustrate that actually a lot more people suddenly realized that you can buy drugs online, that you can access drugs online. And the big scare here was with the, quote, legal highs at the time, obviously have since been banned by the Novel Psychoactive Substances Act of 2016. But suddenly we see this growing awareness in the mainstream media that actually it is possible to access drugs, and just regular people start to access them. And I was at university at this time, and I knew people who just went online and bought drugs during that period. So it became something a lot more than it was when this culture began to emerge in the 1990s. Of course, the most famous of these markets has been the Silk Road, right? You guys have probably all heard that term. That was a quote-unquote darknet crypto market is what people refer to them as. And there's been a lot of research into these crypto markets, how they operate, how you gain access to them, the types of forums, and how supply occurs in those spaces. And I've given you a couple of references there. And the Silk Road specifically is an interesting one because its founder, Ross Ulbricht, who called himself Dread Pirate Rogers, he actually founded it not as a drug market, but just as a marketplace free of government regulation. He really bought into libertarian political philosophy. He just said, I think if people aren't hurting other people, you should be able to supply them with whatever you want. Any market transaction that's not hurting somebody else, you should be able to do that. Which, of course, meant that a lot of drugs were sold on the Silk Road, and that's kind of what it became famous for. When it began being reported in media, it was, as we can see from this Mail article, Silk Road website allows UK drug users to buy cocaine and heroin by mail order from all over the world. So again, this sort of slightly obscure technology, you had to have a Tor browser, you had to know how to navigate onion sites, you had to be familiar with Bitcoin. This was back in 2011-ish, 2012, that article came out. All of a sudden, this starts to become mainstream, and there's this growing awareness of the ability to buy drugs online. Now, subsequent research has actually gone beyond looking at these crypto markets and has explored actually more surface web means of access. And that's what I'm going to be exploring today. But as we can see, people such as Van der Ven and Cohenrath and Hall and Antonopoulos, they've looked at these online pharmacies and this idea of you can buy illicit medicines online. And whether that's, Viagra or diazepam or steroids, there are all these different places where you can place orders and have them sent to you. And similarly, Moyle et al. Recently came out with this article, Drugs for Sale, which explores how social networking apps such as Snapchat and WhatsApp, now these are becoming a means by which people access drugs. So again, pointing to this idea that online drug markets are highly diverse. So where does my research fit into this? Well, image and performance enhancing drugs, and primarily steroids we're talking about, actually they're an increasing focus for policymakers because the use of these drugs seems to have greatly increased in recent years. Particularly sort of I would say post-2010 we start to see an increase, and then it really jumps about 2015 to 17, looking at official figures. Obviously, those don't tell the whole story. So people have linked this to sort of media pressures and the impacts that social media might have, and you can see I've got this article by Van der Ven and Mulrooney discussing this idea of pressures to have the perfect profile picture lead men to take steroids. And I've also presented on that at the Work Employment Society conference, this idea of this aesthetics culture and fitting in and the role of body capital there. So when we're looking at these drugs, in local market contexts, it's mostly social supply. It's people accessing through friends in gyms or somebody known to them in a gym who sells them steroids. And that seems to be the most prevalent form of supply. But there's also these online pharmacies where you can just type in, buy steroids UK, and you get taken to one of these websites, you click to add it to a basket, and you have it sent to you. Same as for some of those other medicines. And those also seem to be an option for accessing image and performance enhancing drugs. But in the course of my doctoral research, when I was talking to people in local gym contexts, one of the main things that kept coming up was this idea of bodybuilding forums as being a really good place to visit if you wanted information on steroids, if you wanted to be able to use steroids and so on. So what I was aiming to do in this research was actually explore those forums, take an example of one of those forums, bodybuilding forums, and just go really in depth on every single post that mentions steroids and try and look at sort of user motivations and how the market itself operated. So as you can see, I've noted there, I wound up looking at 28,800 unique posts in relation to this. So this is a really in-depth understanding of the market you're going to get. It was qualitative analysis rather than quantitative, and you'll see some of the sort of narratives, and I'll use a lot of voice and quotations in the course of this presentation. So that's just to fully contextualize it. So let's have a look at this market. So the first thing to explore is what makes a bodybuilding forum different to other forms of access to these drugs. Why do buyers choose to go to bodybuilding forums in order to access these drugs as opposed to go to one of these crypto markets or one of these online pharmacies, or just buy it from someone you know in the gym? Because use is very normalized in gyms, access quite easy there. So we're going to spend the first portion of the findings just exploring motivations for access and what makes the forum distinct. So, as I noted, if you go to gyms, especially in the UK, it's very easy to get hold of steroids. You talk to some big guy who knows some other guy who sells steroids, right? Most people who go to the gym know who they would talk to if they wanted to buy steroids. Men and women, from what I've heard, female personal trainers have said in terms of getting fat burners, most women know who they would talk to in the gym. So, for most people, the internet isn't actually the easiest means of access, especially in the UK. Now, this was an international forum rather than a UK forum, so that will affect the findings, just to throw that out there for you guys now. But even so, you would think that the internet probably isn't the easiest choice for people who want to be able to acquire these drugs. But one thing that's relevant to keep in mind when we're discussing this forum-based market is the cultural influence. So it's this social community of like-minded posters. It's people who are interested in bodybuilding or fitness culture or powerlifting. They all have similar interests, and there's this real online culture where they, have their own in-jokes and memes and so on. And part of how that community then builds up means that actually when people who are participants in that community are selling steroids, and other participants within that community are buying steroids, there's actually this real social aspect. And combined with the semi-open nature of the market on the forum, whereby suppliers are competing with one another for forum regulars as customers, that actually leads to a very interesting market structure, where we see this blend of what's called social supply, buying from friends and known people, along with semi-open competition. So, as I've noted, why do people go to forums? Well, instead of buying from either some bodybuilder in the gym or some website, as we see for online pharmacies, actually when you're buying from somebody on the forum, it's people who you can talk to, interact with, who you know socially and culturally. It's a social network, effectively. And suppliers were known to buyers as individuals. Now obviously it's anonymous, but everybody has their forum handle, their name, their reputation that goes along with that. So although anonymous, it's also semi-social, semi-known. So Vice actually did an article exploring bodybuilding forums and saying they occupy this weird space between anonymous forums and Facebook, a social networking website. So everybody has their own profile names, and the sellers in these spaces, of course, build reputations and are known by buyers, which is important for how the market operates. So you have a social network with real reputation elements, and people can build a reputation to their name in the context of this market. But along with the sort of semi-anonymity that the internet provides, people are only identifiable by pseudonym, including the sellers. So actually, there's less concern than in a local market regarding law enforcement and so on. So it's a more open market in terms of people are less afraid of getting caught because they're semi-anonymous, they're using a pseudonym, but then at the same time they can build the reputation as though they're a known and named person. So this creates a really unique market structure. And the significance of this structure can clearly be seen in the discussion of motivations by buyers. So the first thing that buyers noted with regards to why they went to an online forum to get steroids was the price difference between the forum and other means of access. So some of the regulars on the forum, they commented on the steep prices that they've been paying in gyms prior to finding the forum or prior to buying through the forum. So we've got Deca Rage here, says, my first time I bought from a friend of a friend, basically. Spent $280 for 2 vials of Test E and 80 tabs of Winstrol. I took my business online. Seems to be the going rate in the gym stuff. So buying through a friend of a friend, as I say, very common in gym environments, but feels that it's way too expensive to acquire locally. Similarly, Straya is from Australia, so giving you some of that international perspective, notes that you're far more likely to get ripped off buying out of a gym than you are buying through the forum. So there's this perception that actually price-wise, you're much better off coming to an online forum. So why is that? Well, this poster, Knob, he says that actually the real reason is it's all capitalism, man. Free market is doing what it do, can't be mad at that. So he says it semi-jokingly, but he's not wrong that actually in a gym where you have, oh, you've got to go and seek out this bodybuilder and you've got to ask him, what have you got? How much is it going for? That's semi-closed market, so the prices aren't necessarily competitive. When you're on a forum and prices are being posted a bit more openly, then sellers have to compete with one another, and that naturally drives prices down. The competition decreases the price. So there's actually more competition on forums than you see in gyms, just because people can openly discuss what reasonable prices for steroids are, who you should buy from. The other thing is the international nature of the forum. So sellers in low-income countries could benefit from selling steroids that they just bought. There's an example, one called Serbtech. He was from Serbia, obviously, and he would go down to his local pharmacy where it's legal to sell steroids, and he would buy them over the counter, pharmaceutical grade, and he would package it up and send them to places like America and Britain and Norway and so on, where you can charge a lot more. So consequently, all the sellers had to compete with whatever the lowest price is. If someone in a low-income country can make sufficient profit based on, what that will stretch to in their home country, then obviously that also has a downward pressure on pricing. So prices in the forum cheaper than through alternative means, and that was one of the appeals. Now, didn't necessarily carry over in the UK because possession of steroids is decriminalised here, so people can sort of more openly sell them in local markets. But when we look at the data from America and Australia, certainly price was a key motivation. So what about in the UK? What motivations were there here from users? Well, forum users noted that when you went to gyms, when you went to online pharmacies to buy product, actually the quality could be quite poor. You weren't guaranteed high quality product. Because most steroids aren't pharmaceutical grade. Obviously, Serptec was buying Galenica branded steroids and posting them out. Generally, steroids are made from somebody buys powders from somewhere like China, has it imported in powder form, then turns it into liquid vials in their house by brewing it up with like either legitimate oils or it could be vegetable oils, right? Brewing it with alcohol. That's how steroids are broadly made. And I've got a paper hopefully getting published very soon on that. I just did the minor corrections. But this means that actually steroids often are of unknown quality, and if you're just in a local gym environment, you just have to buy whatever brand the local supplier stocks. So whatever the dealer in your gym, you find the big bodybuilder, whatever he's got, that's what you have to buy, essentially. Hence, there's not that much opportunity to discriminate based on quality. And even though Kumar and Salinas in their work have said it occurs, and in my doctoral thesis, people I spoke to in local markets said, oh yeah, you can choose, some people have pharmaceutical grade product and so on. Actually what happens is very often the good quality product is the exact same substance in the poor quality, it's just got a different label slapped onto it. And that's the finding that came out of my local market research. So again, be on the lookout for that paper, which is hopefully coming out very soon. But on the forum, what happens, it's no longer, oh, you have to seek out the bodybuilder and just take whatever he has, or you go on this online pharmacy and you just buy whatever they're stocking. Actually, sellers advertise based on their reputation with the forum regulars. So consequently, sellers had a very strong incentive to sell the best quality product that they could, because they were going to be judged, all their sales were going to be based on their reputation on the forum. So here's some discussions of Dark Lord, who was like the biggest seller on the forum, the most popular seller, discussing his product. So this casual poster, if you see a non, it just means it's a casual, not somebody with a name and rep. He says, currently on Dark Lord's test and mass, I've used 3 other UGLs, meaning underground lab, with very good reputations previous to him, and his is by far the best quality I've used. He's a great source, and I plan on using him as long as I can. Right, so perception, I've come to this forum, I've used 3 other underground labs, poor quality product, I've come here, finally somebody selling a very good quality product. And Rico, forum regular, says, I don't have years of experience or anything, but Dark Lord shit is the best quality I've used by quite a decent margin. So we can see that certainly the perception is quality is much higher when you buy through a bodybuilding forum. And as I've noted, this isn't necessarily accurate. Kumar et al. Suggests that actually in quantitative testing this isn't necessarily visible. But we'll explore that a bit later because it's interesting how the forum dealt with the quantitative side of testing things. But certainly the perception was, here we have this open market where sellers are very reliant on having a good reputation. That means higher quality of product broadly. So I said, why is this relevant to UK forum users? Why did it affect them more when price didn't necessarily so much? So this is an example of Claire, actually a man, just posts using a woman's name. He had bought a steroid vial from one of these online pharmacies based in the UK, had it shipped to him, came on the forum and said, actually, the product that they stock are shitty. Picture most definitely related. And there's a dead fly in his steroid vial because it's been brewed up by someone at home. And the first response he gets from a casual user is, did someone else make that in his shed or something? Laughing my ass off. And the second says, I cringed, all aboard the train to Abscess City. And then finally, Bain, who's one of the regulars, sort of makes a joke. Is this a tequila worm for steroids or something? So you can see how bad quality product can be when it's made in these local market contexts and sold on these online direct order websites, the so-called online pharmacies, where it's actually poor quality. So obviously there's a huge degree of variation. Van der Ven and Cohenrat talk about actually high quality customer service coming from some online pharmacies, but certainly the perception on the forum was you're at risk of getting a dead fly in your steroid vial because someone probably made it in their shed if you buy it through one of those. So the perception certainly was you'll get much better quality if you buy through the forum because of the reputation mechanisms, right? Sellers on the forum very reliant on their reputation. That's what their entire business is based on. Whereas an online pharmacy, they don't particularly care. You know, they might delete negative reviews, they might just change their name and rebrand. There's all sorts of ways around it. So on the forums, certainly far more important to have a reputation for the quality of product, as well as the competition on price. In addition to quality and price, these same pressures, these same reputation mechanisms by which suppliers were judged actually also led to higher quality customer service, which again was given as one of the motivations. And as I said, I just referenced Van der Ven and Cohenrat. Obviously, I'm not saying there isn't a customer service focus on any online pharmacies, just the perception was that on a forum you get much better customer service than you would through alternative means. So again, the bodybuilder in the local gym, essentially it's take it or leave it, right? If you're not happy, he doesn't have to necessarily do anything. But on the forum, you could come online and you could leave a scathing review if you weren't happy with the service. So a lot more pressure on people to actually deliver. So we can see discussion of Dark Lord. Again, I said he's the most popular supplier on the forum. This casual poster says, Dark Lord will work with you and include free shit in every order. Every order I have placed, he has thrown in free shit. Every single one. Because again, the importance of reputation means that the sellers are actively having to sort of court buyers. So they're making sure that buyers have a very favourable outlook on them. And similarly, Nob, one of the forum regulars we referenced earlier, he says, Dark Lord is legit, confirmed by every single person who's ever ordered from him. An extremely nice and helpful guy on top of it. Which is cool because he's a big scary looking bastard. So we can see the importance of reputation on the forum meant that there was great focus on customer service, and the perception of forum users was that you got much better service on the forum than you would in a gym or through an online pharmacy. As well, going back to what Nob has to say about it, being one of the regulars, he says, you know, the two largest suppliers who operated on the forum, which was Dark Lord, as we talked about, and Fat Man, actually, what I like about them is they run their own gear, so you know it's legit because they're actually testing it on themselves, and you can just internet shout at them if you're unhappy with the product. So you can very publicly say, if you have a problem, you can just say it on the forum, everyone on the forum will hear, and they're conscious of this, they're on the forum all the time addressing complaints. So you essentially have a 24-hour customer service helpline when you're on a bodybuilding forum ordering, as opposed to alternative means, right? So there are practical reasons why the customer service would be better based on how sales occurred through reputation mechanisms. So the final point on this is sort of the informal regulation mechanisms, and in terms of motivations, that's the community side of the forum, how the community actually all looked out for each other and made sure that people weren't getting scammed and ripped off. So in discussing the role of reputation, it's worth noting that actually this fear of being scammed was very present. So when discussing online pharmacies and so on, forum users would say, I'm terrified of either getting scammed or it's shit quality. That was a big concern. You send the money off and you don't get anything back, or you just get completely bunk product back. But on the forum, there were some quite formal mechanisms which sought to address this. So this idea of reputation, people who came on who wanted to start supplying would be vetted by the forum regulars. So we have this instance of Dole who's talking to someone who's saying, I'll place an order with me, I'll deliver it, I got good quality product, but is refusing to send out any samples to the regulars so they can verify it. And he just says, why would anyone believe you? You don't want to send a few of the regulars here, even some of the cheaper stuff you have, even if it's going to help your rep massively. You don't make sense, buddy, you really don't. So they have this kind of formal mechanism. If you want to be seen as a reliable supplier on the forum, you should send free product to the regulars to review, and if they're happy with your service, if they're happy with your product, then you get recommended, and that gets you the more casual buyers, right? So there are actually some informal and some almost quite formal regulation mechanisms to determine reputation. Anyone could come on the forum, anyone could create an account, a fake name, and say, I'm selling steroids, contact me, send me money. But this was how that was regulated. If you didn't try and get the regulars on your side, it would really hurt your reputation. So there was strong incentive for suppliers to do that, which obviously meant that the forum, on average, the quality level rose, because those who weren't able to do that, who did have poor quality or poor service, didn't then get the reputation, so didn't tend to get the customers. As well as this, just casual users, just the regular community on the forum would actually regulate people who they saw to be acting in bad faith. So this guy who called himself Scrooge McDuck, he comes on and says, the next 2 people to buy NK677, S4, LG, blah, 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 SARMs basically, get a 3-month cycle of any other compound. And the first response is someone saying, implying they'll get anything except robbed. And the second is, the next 2 people who buy off this guy will get nothing just like the rest. So they couldn't kick people off for, falsely advertising. Anyone could come on and create an account and say they were selling. But the community had ways of regulating bad behavior so that they would say, hey, this guy hasn't delivered product, therefore don't buy from this guy. That shows the importance of these reputation mechanisms in the market. So market very strongly regulated by open customer feedback, posted publicly on the forum, this feedback on suppliers, which of course meant that suppliers had to be more conscious of the quality of service and product they were providing. So that's kind of the informal mechanisms whereby the market was regulated through reputation and which drew people to the market because of the impacts it had on price, quality, and customer service. But what about a bit more detail on some of the market mechanisms, how third-party verification occurred? I gave you the example of new sellers were expected to send things to the regulars to test out the quality if they wanted to get a good reputation. So let's explore some of those themes in a bit more depth. So sellers were subject to broad reputation feedback from anybody on the forum. Anyone who bought from them could just publicly post on the forum what their experience was of the quality, the reliability of the seller, of their speed of dealing with issues, the customer service in general, and the quality, of course. But some of the feedback mechanisms on the forum were actually more significant than this. They were quite substantial. So specifically, we're going to look at some of these instances where a third party would verify a seller. So they're verifying on behalf of buyers because they're wanting to say, hey, this seller is legit, they do have good quality product. But it also benefits the sellers because, of course, better reputation means more people are going to buy from you. So there were kind of these third parties, forum regulars, who actually their actions benefited both buyers and sellers. So it's quite interesting how the market kind of came together. So just in turn, we're going to look at 3 of these. We're going to look at how sellers were reviewed by forum regulars, how qualitative testing of compounds occurred, and I gave you the examples earlier of Dark Lord having a very good reputation based on people's perceptions of their use of his product. And then we're going to look at the quantitative testing, which I alluded to earlier. And all of this was believed to ensure the market on the forum operated in a way that was preferable to alternative means of access through gyms and online pharmacies. It meant better quality product, better service. So in terms of reviews of potential suppliers, as I said, anybody could come on the forum and claim to be selling product. Anyone could come on and say, contact me and I'll get you testosterone for this amount. But suppliers wanted to have a good reputation with the regulars because that would get them more customers. Because if you get verified as legit, people would be more willing to buy from you. And the regulars wouldn't, every time you came into a thread, say, hey, this person isn't legit, as we saw for Scrooge McDuck. So it's interesting seeing this example. So this is a new supplier, he calls himself Gainsborough. He comes on and he says, hey guys, I'm from Egypt, looking to start selling. I can get Pharma Test for $1.33 per ampule, which is incredibly cheap because he's in Egypt. Let me know if people would be interested in buying. So Dole, one of the regulars, says, shoot me your details, and one of the casual posters comes on and actually says, pharma legit, cheaper than underground lab. Don't get me wrong, if the guy is legit, I'll buy a ton of shit from him, and I hope he is, but if a deal is too good to be true, and Dole replies, sorry, Knob then interjects and says, to be honest, if he sends me 10 and they actually come, I'll buy 100. So that's how the system works. You send the regulars some free samples. If you can prove that you have decent service, then people are going to start buying from you. Right? So that's how the market is really regulated at heart. Why this example is interesting is because Gainsborough doesn't send free product out. So you would think that would hurt his rep immediately. But because it's so cheap, this is pharmaceutical grade testosterone for $133 an ampule. That's cheaper than you can get it anywhere. So consequently, there's a real interest in him just because of the, quote, absurdly cheap prices, as one of the other regulars phrases it. So what do the regulars do? He's not sending them free product to verify his quality, verify his service. Well, they get together and they agree one of them is going to place a test order, and then he's going to post a review of his experience that all of them can refer to. So they don't even need him to send freebies. So Skeletor places one order, a small order from Gainsborough, buys a sample of some product, places his test order on behalf of all the regulars. All the regulars have agreed no one is buying from this guy until Skeletor comments. So once he receives this order, Skeletor then posts this detailed review, and I've actually abridged this, it was much longer in the original, but he references actually everything that kind of happened with trying to buy through Gainsborough. And he posts it under the name The Official Gainsborough Review. And he comments, you've probably seen this new guy in recent threads advertising. In order to confirm his legitimacy, I decided to go through with a small order. The lack of professionalism was something that could probably be attributed to inexperience, but I won't let it slide so easily. The initial draw of his, quote, service, if one could call it that, was the almost absurdly priced pharma-grade gear. However, a total of 75 emails from first contact was somehow necessary to move my one single small order. The frustrating part was the lack of turnaround on each reply. Contact 3 out of 10. He has much still to learn before I or any of you should consider ordering. As for myself, I will be sticking to Serptec. His professionalism is very much worth the slight price increase. And this review gets posted every time afterwards that Gainsborough is trying to advertise in a thread, to warn any casuals who didn't see it the first time, hey, our guy who went out and tested this seller for you, he says he's not legit. Don't buy from him. Terrible service. So that shows how the forum actually develops these mechanisms among the regulars where they agree, yeah, you do a test order and then we'll hear about your experience and then we can decide if we want to buy from this guy. So that really shows you these reputation mechanisms in action, that you literally have somebody formally doing an official review of someone who's offering to sell on the forum. And as we see, actually this means, because of how it's structured, all the regulars agree to this, Skeletor's review has huge impact on the reputation of Gainsborough. And at the same time, how do the other regulars treat it? Well, after he posts this, John Deere asks him, how do I send you dollars for the review? Because it's so helpful. Now he knows not to order from this guy, who, if you came to an online pharmacy and they were advertising pharmaceutical grade testosterone for $133 an ampule, how would you know it was terrible service? On the forum, they have these mechanisms in place where they can actually verify it. And kind of, it does occur with online, offline transactions as well, looking at Van der Ven and Cohenrath's work, where in local market contexts, if someone recommends an online pharmacy, one person will buy from that, and then if they have a good experience offline, they pass that on. So this is kind of the online manifestation of that finding, is that the forum can regulate in this manner. And this casual poster notes, lack of professionalism, in quotes, that's painfully obvious. Appreciate the review even if it was about what I expected based on the pricing. So we can see actually how the forum regulars all look to help one another out, and in doing so they help out casual buyers, so that anyone coming to the forum now has more information about which sellers are good quality, which ones are worth ordering from. And that's how reputation operates on the forum. So in addition to service, obviously we noted earlier in relation to Darkwood, he had a very good reputation for quality. And it's interesting to see how quality was verified. So here we have Serbtech, who, as we know, is a seller. He actually sells testosterone. And yet here he is saying, oh, Nob asked me to pass on that Dark Lord's tren is legit. He's been on it less than 3 weeks and the stuff is killing him. He front-loaded some stupid amount though, well, I think it was 2 grams or something, which is a huge dose of steroids, just to test that it is legitimate. But no, this is a guy who, he is a seller himself, but because of the community aspects of the forum and everybody wants to help each other out, he's actually saying, hey, this other seller on here, his tren is legit, so if you want tren, maybe go to him. So it's interesting how that operates, and the way in which forum regulars verify quality for one another and encourage buying from a diversity of sources. And it wasn't only buyers who were testing product to kind of help each other out. As we can see in this example, Dark Lord himself actually says he wants people testing his product in this way. So this casual poster asks, why does Decorage get all the free shit? Sad face. And Dark Lord says, he has a lot of experience with the drugs we're all using. That's why I value his feedback. I've given samples to other guys, but really I'm looking for seasoned roiders to test shit. I can't rely on a noob or someone that doesn't know exactly what to look for. So Dark Lord was one of these sellers who was buying powders in bulk from China and then brewing it up in his own lab at home. But obviously he wasn't 100% sure on the quality of the powders he was importing. So he got people to test that for him and would pick on people who had a lot of experience using steroids so they could give a more accurate representation. So he was verifying his own product quality, and in the course of that, obviously, was able to then advertise the product based on, this is the feedback I have gotten on this. And the regulars who tested it would back him up. So we can see that actually all the parties on the forum benefited from this. The buyers knew what was seemingly the better quality product. The sellers would know whether their initial source was good quality, and also, if they did get good feedback, could then use it as part of their advertising and build their reputation based on the quality. And as I've noted, that's all tied in with the nature of the forum as this cultural space, this kind of social network, and does appear to reward most the sellers who actually evidence the quality of their product. But I noted that Kumar et al. Have done quantitative surveys on steroids in the local market. They were checking steroid qualities from Plymouth and Leeds, I think it was, and they said actually what's perceived to be the high quality is no better than the quote terrible quality. It's basically the same stuff in each. So this is all very well, all these perceptions from forum users saying, yeah, you get much better quality. Is there anything to support that? And that's where the final market mechanism arose, which is very interesting, I think. Quantitative testing of the product to actually verify what is the strength of the product. So this is one of the big concerns about this underground product, underground labs, is that you don't know its quality. And a lot of products are advertised as being pharmaceutical grade, especially in England, isn't at all. It's underground lab. And most of the smart people who deal with steroids, like powerlifters, they all know that. So it is a big concern, actually, how do we verify quality? So Skeletor, who's the regular who did that review we just saw, he says, beyond possible anecdotal evidence, we just can't know quality with any precision. This is just the UGL game, and will always be the UGL game until someone finds out an inexpensive way to test concentration. And this is the problem in local markets. In local gyms, we don't know the quality. We know perceptions of quality from people who have used it. We don't actually know if it's that good. And Kumar et al. Suggest it probably isn't as good as people perceive. Interestingly, on the forum, a mechanism emerged from the market to in fact verify this. So as Serbtech noted, laugh out loud, we actually have a guy here who posts from time to time who has access to high pressure liquid chromatography. Quantitative testing. He tested my tren a few months back, and I think he takes requests. So on the forum emerges this guy who works in a lab in Serbia, and out of hours, he can quantitatively test compounds which are sent to him by people on the forum. So a casual poster is asking Dark Lord about his quality of product and says, have you ever considered lab testing your products? And Milo interjects and says, shamelessly advertising my commercial services. And Darklord's response is, you test stuff, and Milo says yes. So it's interesting. Buyers want high quality product. Sellers want to advertise based on their product quality because that's what buyers want. So a third party who has access to testing equipment, who says you can send me stuff and I will test it, and advertises it as commercial services to the sellers. He is charging sellers to test their product, to verify it, because that's what buyers want. And this all just comes together in the market. The market allows for this third-party tester to emerge because everyone is going to benefit from it. So suppliers can advertise based on this verified quality. They know their sales will go up if their product is verified quantitatively as being of high quality, so they can make money. And Milo sees this gap, so he says, hey, pay me and I'll test your product, right? So this shows in the absence of when we're in this online space and there aren't these worries about law enforcement, about what's legitimate, what you can and can't do, actually these opportunities do spring up in the market to address the concerns that don't get addressed in local market contexts. Because I was trying to quantitatively test steroids for my research, and it's an absolute nightmare. It's very hard to find a lab willing to do that, especially do it cheaply. I had UK anti-doping threaten to have me banned from all sports for life just for suggesting I was going to acquire steroids to do this. So it's interesting that, remove yourself from that. Here's a guy who lives in a country where steroids are legal, right, in Serbia. So now he can fulfill that role, which you don't get in local markets under prohibition. So what happens? Well, we see very quickly why sellers were willing to pay Milo for this service, why there was this gap in the market that he could fill to test products, to verify quality. So this casual poster asks, has anyone bothered to test Fat Man or Darklist shit, or is this just Wild West selling underdosed bunk gear? And Fat Man interjects, I've had my stuff lab tested. And the casual poster says, I assume we'll prove that before doing business. And Fat Man posts mass spectrometry results sent to him by Milo, who tested his product for a fee when he sent it, and says, hey, here's the results, it's up to you to verify what Milo's told me. And this other forum regular comes on and says, oh yeah, it's really easy because there's only one compound and then you just look at the molecular weight and you can see that it's correct. And this, obviously, this casual poster sees this and says, if that is indeed your current batch, then actually there's no kind of impurities, it's more or less pure, just the one product, and it has the correct molecular weight. I would recommend anybody to gear like that. So no, the market itself just came up with this mechanism to address this issue that is a real problem in local markets, where we have more worries about law enforcement, we have a bit more prohibition, even though possession is decriminalised in the UK. When you remove yourself from that and you have this third party in a country where steroids are just legal, actually it is possible just to emerge on the global market. Hey, there is a commercial opportunity for somebody to sell testing services to steroid sellers, and consequently, buyers can now be assured of the quality of the product that they're buying. So Milo comes along during the course of my research. Actually, it was really convenient I conducted the research during the time period I did, because I caught this transition from quantitative testing of perception of effects over to actually getting the quantitative data. So how does that affect how selling occurs on the forum, how the market on the forum operates? Well, as we see from Darklord, who was the biggest seller, who was the guy who, he had the highest quality product based on qualitative perceptions, he gets asked, what happens if your gear fails, Milo? And he says, if it tests fuck, I'm going to be sending a lot of free gear or refunding people. Up to them. So as soon as this mechanism comes into the market, and now product quality can be verified, and anyone can send gear to Milo and have it tested for a fee, all of a sudden now Darklord is acknowledging, hey, if it turns out I was wrong saying I have the best quality, I'm going to refund people. So it massively changes the market now. The reputation mechanisms are all changed just by this third party seeing this opportunity to lab test product and sell his services doing that. So here we see when we hear about harms caused by drug impurities and not knowing the purity of product, which is a big deal, especially in local markets, actually, this niche just got filled by Milo in this relatively free market online. And this kind of evidences what the economist Robert Murphy says, that actually market mechanisms will naturally lead to consumer satisfaction in illicit markets if they don't have to worry about police presence, about law enforcement, and so on. And I think this very strongly evidences Robert Murphy's suggestion there. So in terms of takeaways based on this research, as noted, the fact that the forum was relatively more secure from law enforcement because there were people living in areas where steroids were legal, they could kind of do things that you couldn't necessarily do in countries where there's prohibition in general, actually meant that, yeah, there was more opportunity for these market mechanisms to address some of these problems that we talk about. We need to address this in harm reduction, harm minimization policy. Turns out the market will do that in the absence of prohibition. And I think this data really strongly evidences that. So greater competition led to lower prices, higher quality of product, better quality service, and harm reduction policy doing quantitative testing, including testing for heavy metals and so on. Milo wasn't just testing product strength, he was also testing for impurities, as we saw. So you could argue, well, this makes the case that prohibition works, because of course, if price decreases in the absence of prohibition, or when abstracted away from strict prohibition to an online market, well, if price goes down, aren't more people going to be more likely to use the drugs? And if there's better service, surely that would have a compounding effect, right? So you could argue that prohibition works in preventing that. But remember what I opened with, right? One of our very first premises was that policy looks to reduce harms. So if the quality of product is more assured in a freer market with mechanisms such as third-party verification naturally emerging and sellers willingly paying for it because it benefits them because they sell more, actually, it does seem that one of the key things that we talk about in addressing harms would naturally be addressed by the market in the absence of prohibition. So, just to quote some responses from my local market research, from my doctoral thesis, actually product legitimacy is one of the main issues to focus on, and Kumar et al. Found the same. So I've had these responses talk about, Rich, who was a powerlifter, said, I got really itchy on test 400. Maybe I was allergic to it because it was bathtub brew, right? Somebody's imported the powder and brewed it up in their bathtub, quite literally. So there was something dodgy in it. And Josh says, a lot of people are not legitimate. They don't put an actual pharmaceutical grade steroid into the bottles. They're filling them with different types of oils and stuff. So in reality, you don't know what you're putting into your body. So again, serious issues. These are the main harms we see in the local market. I did a presentation for BSA Southwest Medical Sociology Conference on the harms that we might see linked to these bathtub brews and poor quality steroids, which you can watch on YouTube, by the way. Well worth checking out. So that is a real concern when we're talking about harm minimization, harm reduction. That's the main thing that we're addressing. But note, the market actually came up with an advanced system to address this, where people were willing to pay for it and it benefited everyone. It ensured that there was higher quality product because sellers were willing to pay the extra because it would help them in advertising. So again, it seems Bob Murphy is probably right, and in the absence of prohibition, actually, harm would probably naturally go down because you could be assured of better quality product because of these third-party regulators emerging. Thank you.